Well, hello, you're right. This is the first lesson in a sequence of lessons we'll be looking at on microbes. So initially I just want you to have a look at this starter. The starter asks, what causes rotting and mould? Now obviously rotting and mould are caused by microbes, which are also called microorganisms. Micro meaning small, and organism obviously being a living thing. So we're looking at what are microbes. Hopefully by the end of today we'll have been able to identify some different types of microbes. There are 3. Hopefully we'll be able to explain the structure of these microbes, and maybe we'll have even got as far as comparing the different types of microbes. So as I've said, a microbe is another word for a microorganism. It's an organism which, because it's really small, needs a microscope to be seen. There are 3 different types of microbes. At the bottom here we've got some mushrooms, something that I'm hoping all of you will recognise in the middle, and then something on the right hand side there on probably all of your hands right now. The left hand picture is a fungus. The right hand picture is supposed to represent bacteria. They don't actually look like that. None of them have faces. And the middle one is of course a virus, and that particular virus there is COVID-19. So the first one we're going to take a look at is bacteria, and we'll make some notes on these at the end, so please don't worry about doing that at the moment, but if you'd like to, you can stop the video and use each of these slides just to go through a few different bits and pieces. So bacteria, they're made of one cell, what we call single cellular organisms. We find them everywhere, on your hands, on the surfaces in your house. They're not all bad. Some of them are pretty helpful. Things that we use to make cheese and yogurt require bacteria. However, some really are quite dangerous. So there are a couple of examples there: MRSA and cholera, which both cause illness. And pathogens is a word that we use to describe microbes that cause disease. So MRSA and cholera could both be described as pathogens. If you look at the picture on the right hand side there, you can see 10 fairly common bacteria. You'll notice that they are different shapes and sizes. Some of them have tails, which we use a fancy biology word called flagella. Some of them have spikes, little pieces that come out of them, which we call pili. Some of them are small balls, some of them are larger balls, some of them are coil-shaped, spiral-shaped, cone-shaped. The most common 3 are rods, balls and spirals. If you look at the left-hand picture there, you can see a diagram of a bacteria. You'll notice that it has a cell wall, a cell membrane, very much like a plant cell. It has cytoplasm like most organisms, and it has a strand of DNA which isn't in a nucleus. So most normal cells that are more advanced will have a nucleus, but we're going to look at some cells as well as bacteria that don't have nuclei. Next up is the virus. If you look at the picture in the top right hand corner, you'll see a diagram of a type of virus. This is very, very simplified, but broadly speaking, they are organisms made up of a single protein coat and a strand of DNA or some other type of genetic information instead of having a nucleus as well. They also cause disease, and there are some debates over whether or not they should be considered living. If you think about Mrs. Gren, one of the R's in Mrs. Gren is reproduction. Now, viruses are completely incapable of reproducing on their own, and that leads to some debate as to whether or not they can be considered living organisms. Examples are colds, flus, chickenpox, smallpox, cowpox, and of course coronavirus, which is a type of viruses of which COVID-19 is one. But coronaviruses that we've encountered in the past include things like SARS and MERS. And I highly recommend that you have a look at some of that stuff if you're interested in it. And then finally, the third type of microbe that you need to be aware of is fungi. Now, often fungi is single-celled. So the first of those two pictures there, that single cell on its own, that is a typical single-cell fungi. That one is yeast. In the bottom right-hand corner there, you'll see a mushroom, which is a multicellular organism, which you can see with your eyes. And so they form large networks. And if you look at that mushroom in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll notice it has some things at the bottom that look like roots. And now they're not technically roots, but they spread out and they enable all of the mushrooms that you'll see in a big pile in your garden or in the woods, for example, to be connected to each other, which enables us to actually refer to them as one organism rather than many individuals. So here's the task that I'd like you to complete. I'd like to use Bitesize or some other websites to help you. But there obviously are three types of microbes. We've talked about bacteria, we've talked about viruses, and we've talked about fungi. I'd like you to make a quick note about what they are, where they're found, and what they look like. And in tomorrow's video, we'll have a look at the answers to that. Obviously, I'd like you to do this in your books and try and set it out in a nice way that's going to mean that when you come to look back at your notes, it's something you can use to help you. Now, I just wanted to spend 10 seconds looking at the size of these things that we're talking about. So, in the bottom right hand corner there, you've got what they call a eukaryotic cell. Now that is an animal or a plant cell. The one shown in that diagram is an animal cell, and it's more complicated than you need to know at the moment. You can't see those with your eye. You will need a light microscope to be able to see cells at an individual cell level. And so that is described by that nice orange arrow across the middle there that says light microscope. Now, if you're going to look at some of the organelles, which are the bits that make up a cell, you can see some of those under a light microscope. But they're obviously substantially smaller than a cell. A little bit smaller than most of the organelles in your individual cells, you've got the average sort of bacterial size. Now, some of them are reasonably large, but most bacteria are smaller than most of your organelles. They're certainly smaller than your cells. Now, to see a virus, we need to develop a different type of microscope, because the type of microscopes that we use in school, the light microscope, aren't powerful enough. They don't have the ability to use a large enough magnification to be able to see the viruses or anything smaller. Now, if you wanted to see a virus, you would have to use an electron microscope, which is a very, very clever way of looking at things that are very, very small, using electron beams to generate a picture on a computer. Now, if you have a look at that scale along the top there, you will see that there are some interesting letters, some interesting scales. So on the right hand side there, you'll see 1 millimetre. Now 10 times smaller than a millimetre, we could have called it 0.1 millimetres, but instead we're going to use a different number here. So that's 100 micrometres, and a micrometre is 1,000 times smaller than a millimetre. So as far as you're concerned, each of those steps down there, okay, is just 10 times smaller than the previous one. So 1 millimetre is 10 times bigger than 100 micrometres. And 10 times smaller than that is 10 micrometres, which is about the size of most of your organelles. And then 10 times smaller than that is the size of most bacteria, somewhere about 1 to 10 micrometres, 1 to 5 micrometres in that gap. Okay, that's where most of the bacteria are. And 10 times smaller than that are the larger viruses, which are about 100 nanometres, which is 0.1 micrometres, or 0.000 millimetres. So they're very, very small, and we can't see them with our eyes or even with light microscopes. So before tomorrow, as well as completing the task that I've asked you to do with the table, I'd like to have a look at this picture of the COVID-19 coronavirus. Now, if you look carefully, there are a few different bits sticking out of the virus's surface. There are some big red ones, some slightly smaller orange ones, and some tiny little yellow ones. Now they're called proteins. They're obviously much smaller than the virus itself, and they help the virus work. But what I'm interested to see if you can work out is just looking at this picture. What do you think those little sticks do? How do you think they're going to help the virus to work? I hope everyone's keeping well, and I hope that you'll get through the work, and then when we come to look at tomorrow's work, I'll give you some of the answers to a few of the bits that we've looked at today.